Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out some Edgar Allan Poe. This is called The Angel of the Odd, an extravaganza. It was a chilly November afternoon. I had just consummated an unusually hearty dinner, of which the dyspeptic truffle formed not the least important item, and was sitting alone in the dining room, which my feet upon the fender, and at my elbow a small table which I had rolled up on the fire, and upon which some of the apologies for dessert, with some miscellaneous bottles of wine, spirits, and liqueur. In the morning I had been reading Glover's Leonidas, Wilkie's Epinetus, and Larabine's Pilgrimage, Barlow's Columabad, and Tuckerman's Sicily, and Griswold's Curiosities. I am willing to confess, therefore, that I am now felt a little stupid. I made effort to arouse myself to aid the frequent Lafayette, and all failing, I betook myself to a stray newspaper in despair. Having carefully perused the column of houses to let and the columns of dog lost, and then the two columns of wives and apprentices run away, I attacked with great resolution the editorial matter, and reading it from the beginning to end without understanding a syllable, conceived the possible of it being Chinese, and so read it from end to beginning, and with no more satisfactory result, I was about throwing it away in disgust. This folio of 4 pages, happy work, which not even poets criticize, when I felt my attention somewhat aroused by the paragraph which follows. The avenues of death are numerous and strange. A London paper mentions the decease of a person from a singular cause. He was playing at Puff the Dart, which is played with a long needle inserted into some worsted and blown at a target through a tin tube. He placed the needle at the wrong end of the tube, and drawing his breath strongly to puff the dart forward with force, drew the needle into his throat. It entered his lungs, and in a few days killed him. Upon seeing this, I fell into a great rage, without exactly knowing why. This thing, I explained, is a contemptible falsehood, a poor hoax, the lees of the invention of some pitiable penny a liner, of some wretched concoctor of accidents in cocogne. These follow, knowing the extravagant gullibility of the age, set their wits to work in the imagination of improbable possibilities, of old accidents, as they term them, but to the reflecting intellect like mine, I added in parentheses, putting my forefinger unconsciously to the side of my nose, to the contemplative understanding such as I myself possess, it seems evident at once that the marvelous increase of late to these odd accidents is by far the oddest accident of all. For my own part, I intend to believe nothing henceforward that has anything of the singular about it. Mein Gott, denn wat a fool you bees for that, replied one of the most remarkable voices I have ever heard. At first, it took me for a rumbling in my ears, such as a man sometimes experiences when getting very drunk, but upon second thought, I considered the sound as more nearly resembling that which proceeds from an empty barrel beaten with a big stick, and in fact that I should be concluded it to be but for the articulation of the syllables and words. I am by no means naturally nervous, and the very few glasses of Lafitte which I have sipped served to embolden me a little, and that I felt nothing of trepidation, but merely uplifted my eyes with a leisurely movement and looked carefully around the room for the intruder. I could not, however, perceive anyone at all. Humph, resumed the voice as I continued my survey. You must be so donc as the pig, then, for not see me as I sit here at your side. Thereupon I bethought me of looking immediately before my nose, and there, sure enough, confronting me at the table, sat a personage nondescript, although not altogether indescribable. His body was a windpipe, or a rum puncheon of something of that character, and had a truly Falstaffian air. In its neither extremity were inserted 2 kegs, which seemed to answer all the purposes of legs, forearms there dangled from the upper portion of the carcass 2 tolerably long bottles, which the necks outward for hands, and all the head that I saw the monster possessed was one of those Hessian canteens which resemble a large snuff box with the hole in the middle of the lid. This canteen with a funnel on the top, like a cavalier, cap slouched over the eyes, was set on edge upon the puncheon with the hole towards myself, and through this hole, which seemed puckered up like the mouth of a very precise old maid, and creature was emitting certain rumbling and grumbling noises, which he have evidently intended for intelligible talk. I say, said he, you must de donk as the pig vor sit there and not see me sit there, and I say do you most pigger vu de goose vor de disbelieve that is print the print. T is the tooth, that is it, every word of it. What are you say, pray? I said with much dignity, although somewhat puzzled. How did you get here? And what is it you're talking about? As for I won't come here, replied the figure, that is none of your business. And as for that I be talking about, I be talk about that I think proper as for I be very that is the very thing I come here for to let you see for yourself. You are a drunken vagabond, I said, and I shall ring the bell and order my footman to kick you into the street. He, said the fellow, who, that you can't do. Can't do, said I. What do you mean? I can't do what? Ring the bell, he replied, attempting to grin with a little villainous mouth. Upon this, I made an effort to get up in order to put my threat into execution, but the ruffian just reached across the table very deliberately and hitting me tap on the forehead with the neck of one of the long bottles, knocked me back into the armchair from which I had half risen. I was utterly astounded and for a moment was quite at a loss of what to do. In the meantime, he continued to talk. You see, he said, it is TB's vor sit still, and now you shall know who I be. Let it me see, I am the angel of the odd. The odd enough, too, I ventured to reply, but I was always under the impression that an angel had wings. T wing, he cried, highly incensed, that I pay do meet the wing, meet goat, me do take me for a chicken? Oh, no, I replied, much alarmed. You are no chicken, certainly not. Well then, sit still and behave yourself, and I'll rap you again, miss the visit. It is the chicken ab the wing, and the owl ab the wing, and the imp ab the wing, and the head trifle ab the wing. The angel ab not the wing, and I am the angel of the odd. And your business with me at present is my business, ejaculated the thing. Vine what a low-bred puppy you most pervor to ask a gentleman and an angel about his business. This language was rather more than I could bear, even to an angel, so plucking up courage, I seized a salt cellar which lay within reach, and I hurried it at the head of the intruder. Either he dodged, however, or my aim was inaccurate, and all I accomplished was the demolition of the crystal which protected the dial of the clock upon the mantelpiece. As for the angel, he evinced his sense of my assault by giving me 2 or 3 hard consecutive raps upon the forehead as before. These reduced me at once to submission, and I almost ashamed to confess that either through pain or vexation there came a few tears into my eyes. Mein Gott, said the angel of the odd, apparently much softened at my distress. Mein Gott, hey man, as either very drunk or very sorry. You must not think it is so strong. You must put the water in the wine. Here, 'tis drink like a good feller, and don't cry now, don't. Hereupon the angel of the odd replenished my goblet, which was about a third full of port, with the colorless fluid that he poured from one of his hand bottles. I observed that these bottles had labels about their necks, and that these labels were inscribed Kirschwasser. The considerate kindness of the angel muffled me with no little measure, and aided by the water with which he diluted my port more than once, I at very length regained sufficient temper to listen to his very extraordinary discourse. I cannot pretend to recount all that he told me, but I gleaned from what he said that he was a genius who presided over the contretemps of mankind, and whose business it was to bring about the odd accidents which are continuously astonishing the skeptic. Once or twice, upon my venturing to express my total incredulity in respect to his pretensions, he grew very angry indeed, so that at length I considered it was wiser policy to say nothing at all and to let him have his own way. I talked on, therefore, at great length, while I merely leaned back in my chair with my eyes shut and assumed myself with munching raisins and filliping the stems about the room. And by, the angel suddenly construed this behavior of mine into contempt. He rose in a terrible passion, slouched his funnel down over his eyes, swore a vat oath, and uttered a threat of some character which I did not precisely comprehend, and finally made me a low bow, and departed, wishing me, in the language of the Archbishop of Gil Blas, beaucoup de bonheur and ut paix plus de bon sens. His departure afforded me relief. The very few glasses of Lafitte that I had sipped had the effect of rendering me drowsy. I felt inclined to take a nap of some 15 or 20 minutes, as is my custom after dinner. At 6, I had an appointment of consequence, which I was quite indispensable that I should keep. The policy of insurance for my dwelling house and expired the day before, and some dispute having arisen, it was agreed that at 6 I should meet the board of directors of the company and set the terms of the renewal. Glancing upward to the clock on the mantelpiece, for I felt too drowsy to take out my watch, I had the pleasure to find that I had still 25 minutes to spare. It was 5:30, and I could easily walk to the insurance office in 5 minutes. My usual siestas had never been more to exceed 5:20. I felt sufficiently safe, therefore, and composed myself to my slumbers forthwith. Having completed them in my satisfaction, I again looked toward the timepiece, and it was half inclined to believe in the possibility of odd accidents when I found that instead of ordinary 15 or 20 minutes, I had been dozing only 3, for it still wanted 70 to 20 of the appropriate hour. I betook myself again to my nap, and at length a second time awoke, when, to my utter amazement, it still wanted 27 minutes of 6. I looked up to examine the clock and found that it had ceased running. My watch informed me that it was 7:30, and of course, having slept for 2 hours, I was late to my appointment. It will make no difference, I said. I can call at the office in the morning and apologize. In the meantime, what I can matter is with the clock. Upon examining it, I discovered that one of the raisin stems, which I had been filliping about the room during the discourse of the Angel of the Odd, had flown through the fractured crystal and lodging singularly through in the keyhole, and it ended up projecting outward, had thus arrested the revolution of the minute hand. Ah, said I see how it is. This thing speaks for itself, and naturally accident, such as will happen now and then. I gave the matter no further consideration. At my usual hour, retired to bed, having placed a candle upon a reading stand at the bedhead, and having made an attempt to peruse some pages of the Omnipresence of the Deity, I unfortunately fell asleep in less than 20 seconds, leaving the light burning as it was. The dreams were terrifically disturbed by visions of the Angel of the Odd. Methought he stood at the front of the couch, drew aside the curtains, and in the hollow, detestable tones of a rum puncheon, mentioned me with the bitterest vengeance of the contempt with I had treated him. He concluded a long harangue of taking off his funnel cap, inserting the tube into my gullet, and thus indulging me with an ocean of Kirschwasser, which he had poured into continuous flood from one of the long-necked bottles that stood him instead of an arm. My agony was at length insufferable, and I just awoke just in time to perceive that a rat had run off with the lighted candle from the stand, but not in season to prevent his making his escape with it through the hole. Very soon, a strong suffocating odor assailed my nostrils. The house, I clearly perceived, was on fire. In a few minutes, the blaze broke forth with violence, and in an incredibly brief period, the entire building was wrapped in flames. I egressed from my chamber except through a window and cut off. The crowd, however, quickly procured and raised a long ladder. By means of this, I was descending rapidly and apparent safety when a huge hog, about whose rotund stomach and indeed about whose whole air and physiognomy was that something which reminded me of the angel of the odd, when this hog, I say, which hitherto had been quietly slumbering in the mud, took it suddenly into his hand that his left shoulder needed scratching, and could find no more convenient rubbing post than that afforded to the foot of the ladder. In an instant, I was precipitated and had the misfortune of a fracture of my arm. The accident, which was the loss of my insurance, and which was more serious, the loss of my hair, the whole of which had been singed off by the fire, predisposed me from serious impression, so that I made up my mind to take a wife. That was a rich widow, disconsolate with her loss of her seventh husband, and to her wounded spirit I offered the balm of my vows. I yielded a reluctant consent to my prayers. I knelt to her feet in gratitude and adoration. She blushed and bowed her luxuriant tresses in close constant with those supplied me temporarily by the grand Jean. I know how the entanglement took place, and so it was. I rose with a shining pate, wigless, she in disdain and wrath, half buried in alien hair. Thus ended my hopes of the widow by an accident which could not have been anticipated, to be sure, from which the natural sequence of events had brought about. Without despairing, however, I undertook the siege of a less implacable heart. The fates were again propitious of the brief period, and again a trivial incident interfered. Meeting the betrothed in an avenue thronged with the elite of the city, I was hastening to greet her with one of my best considered bows, when a small particle of some foreign matter, lodging into the corner of my eye, rendered me for the moment completely blind. Before I could recover my sight, the lady of my love had disappeared, irreparably affronted of what she chose to consider my premeditation, rudeness, and passing her by ungreeted. When I stood bewildered in the suddenness of this accident, which might have happened nevertheless to any one under the sun, and while I still continued incapable of sight, I was accosted by the angel of the odd, who proffered me this aid with a civility which I had no reason to expect. He examined my disordered eye with much gentleness and skill, informed me that I had a drop in it, and whatever a drop was, took it out and afforded me relief. I now considered it high time to die, since fortune is so determined to persecute me, and according made my way to the nearest river, here divesting myself of my clothes, and there is no reason why we cannot die as we were born. Therefore, I threw myself headlong into the current, a sole witness to my fate, being a solitary crow who had been seduced into the eating of brandy saturated corn, and so had staggered away from his fellows. No sooner had I entered the water than this bird took it in his head to fly away with the most indispensable portion of my apparel, postponing, therefore, for the present my suicidal design. I just slipped my nether extremities into the sleeves of my coat, and betook myself to a pursuit of the felon with all the nimbleness which the case required and its circumstances would admit. But my evil destiny attended me still, and I ran at full speed with my nose up in the atmosphere and attended only upon the loiner of my property. I suddenly perceived that my feet rested no longer upon terra firma. The fact is, I had thrown myself over the precipice and should evidently have been dashed to pieces for my good fortune in grasping the end of the long guide rope which depended upon from passing a balloon. As soon as I sufficiently recovered my senses to comprehend the terrific predicament of which I stood, or rather hung, I exerted all the power of my lungs to make the predicament known to the aeronaut overhead, but for a long time I exerted myself in the vain. Either the fool could not, or the villain would not perceive me. Meantime, the machine rapidly soared while my strength even more rapidly failed. I was soon at the point of resigning myself to my fate and dropping quietly into the sea when my spirits were suddenly revived by hearing a hollow voice from above, which seemed to be lazily humming an opera air. Looking up, I perceived the angel of the odd. He was leaning with his arms folded over the rim of the car and with a pipe in his mouth, at which he puffed leisurely, seemed to be upon excellent terms with himself and the universe. I was too much exhausted to speak, so I merely regarded him with an imploring air. For several minutes, although he looked me full in the face, and he said nothing. At length, removing carefully his meerschaum from the right to the left corner of his mouth, he condensed to speak. Who pee you? He asked. Und what der trifle you do dare to dare? To this piece of impudence, cruelty, and affection I could reply only by ejaculating the monosyllable help. Help, echoed the ruffian. Not I. There is de pato. Help yourself. Und be damned. With these words, he let fall a heavy bottle of Kirschwasser, which dropped precisely upon the crown of my head, caused me to imagine that my brains were entirely knocked out. Impressed with this idea, I was about to relinquish my hold and give up the ghost with a good grace when I was arrested by the cry of the angel, who bade me hold on. Hold on, he said. Don't pay in the hurry. Don't. We you pay take the older bottle, and have ye got sober yet, and ye come to senses? I made haste, whereupon to nod to my head twice, once in the negative, meaning thereby I would prefer not taking the other bottle at present, and once in the affirmative, intending thus to imply that I was sober and had precisely come to my senses, and by these means I was somewhat softened the angel. Und you believe ten, he inquired. At the last, you believe ten in the possibility of the odd? I again nodded to my head in assent. Und you have belief in me to angel of the odd? I nodded again. Und you acknowledge that you be the blind donk and the fool? I nodded once more. Put your right hand into your left hand breeches pocket, ten in token on your full submission unto the angel of the odd. This thing, for very obvious reasons, I found it quite impossible to do. In the first place, my left arm had been broken on the fall from my ladder, and therefore I would let go to my hold with the right hand. I must have let go altogether. In the second place, I could have no breeches until I came across the crow. I was therefore obliged, much to my regret, to shake my head in the negative, intending thus to give the angel to understand that I found it inconvenient just at that moment to comply with his very reasonable demand. No sooner had I ceased shaking my head than, go to the Teufelten, roared the angel of the odd. In pronouncing these words, he drew a sharp knife across the guide rope of which I was suspended, and as we then happened to be precisely over my own house, which during my peregrinations had been handsomely rebuilt, it so occurred that I tumbled headlong into the ample chimney and alit upon the dining room hearth. Upon coming to my senses, for the fall had very thoroughly stunned me, I found it about 4 o'clock in the morning. I lay outstretched where I had fallen from the balloon, my head groveled into the ashes of the extinguished fire, where my feet reposed upon the wreck of the small table, overthrown and amid the fragments of the miscellaneous dessert, intermingled with the newspaper, some broken glass and shattered bottles, and an empty jug of the sea-damned Kirschwasser. This revenged himself, the angel of the odd. That is the last of The Angel of the Odd by Edgar Allan Poe. I'd like to read another short poem by Miss Emily Bronte. This is called The Comforter. Well hast thou spoken, and yet not taught a feeling strange or new. Thou hast but roused a latent thought, a cloud-closed beam of sunshine brought to glean upon open view. deep down, concealing within my soul that light lies hid from men, yet glows unquenched through shadows roll. Its gentle ray cannot control about the sullen den. Was I not vexed in these gloomy days, and walking along so long? Around me wretched utter praise, or howling o'er these hopeless days, and each a frenzied's tongue, a brotherhood of misery, their smiles as sad as sighs, whose madness daily maddened me, distorting into agony the bliss before my eyes. So stood I in heaven's glorious sun, and in the glare of hell, my spirit drank a mingled tone of seraph's song and demon's moan. What my soul bore, my soul alone within itself may tell. Like a soft air above a sea, tossed by a tempest stir, a thaw wind melting quietly, the snow drift of some wintry lea. Know what sweet thing resembles thee, my thoughtful comforter? And yet a longer speak, calm this resentful mood, and while the savage heart grows meek, to other token do not seek, let the tear upon my cheek evince my gratitude. And we have gratitude today for Mr. Poe and Mrs. Bronte. Thank you very much for your lesson for today. And if you think there's any truth and like and enjoy what I'm doing at all here, please like and subscribe, and God bless the children.